and sun. Her lips were cracked, her head throbbed, but she would not leave, not yet, not until a faint thud echoed across the heat. Hooves. She stood slowly, shielding her eyes. A rider broke the horizon, moving with easy confidence, a cloud of dust trailing behind him. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, and rode like a man who had been on the move a long time. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but as he drew closer, she saw the square jaw, the sunburnt skin, the dust on his shirt and collar. He pulled up a few feet away, his horse snorting softly. "You all right, miss?" His voice was calm, low, like he was afraid to spook her. She stared at him, her throat dry. "I was supposed to be married. 3 days ago, he never came." The man blinked once, then glanced at the tracks. "You have been here this whole time," she nodded. He dismounted in one smooth motion, leading the horse forward a few steps. "Name's Cade Vallon. I was headed toward the mining camp near Tubac, but you look like you need help more than they do." She looked at his face now, really looked. He had a dust line across his cheek where his bandana had been pulled down, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds. Not a man used to comfort, but not cruel either. "I am Florence Abner," she said, her voice hoarse. "I came from Kansas. I left everything. He said he would meet me here." Cade took off his hat. "Florence," he said gently, like he was testing the shape of it in his mouth. "You have any food left?" She shook her head. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped bundle. "Biscuits and dried venison, not much, but it will sit better than heat and heartbreak." She accepted it with both hands, sitting back down on the edge of the platform. He sat beside her, not saying anything more, just letting her eat. She did not realize how hungry she had been until the first bite. "You waited 3 days, Cade said after a while, his voice quiet. "That takes grit." "I thought he loved me," she said. "He wrote letters. Some men write sweet lies when they know they will never have to face the truth." She did not answer. The wind picked up again. A hawk circled overhead. "I have a cabin near the river," he said finally. "A few hours' ride. You should not be out here alone. Heat like this will kill you faster than a broken heart." "What would you expect in return?" she asked without looking at him. "Nothing." She turned to him now. "Why?" He looked at her then, and there was no pity in his eyes, just something steady, something like understanding. "My sister was left the same way. Years ago, I was not there to help her. I am here now," she swallowed hard, "and if I come with you, then I will get you water, a clean bed, and a safe place to rest," he said. "Nothing more unless you want more." Florence studied him. He was not trying to win her, not trying to convince her, just offering a choice. She looked down at the wedding ring still tied to her ribbon. She untied it slowly, held it in her palm for a moment, then let it fall into the dust by the platform. She stood. "All right," she said. "Take me with you." Cade rose and helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. His hands were careful, steady. He did not grip too tightly. She leaned forward, resting her hands on the horn of the saddle. They rode in silence for a while, the desert stretching wide around them. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the sand. "You from Arizona?" she asked after a while. "No, grew up in Colorado territory," he said. "Came south after the war." "You fought," he nodded. "Too young to know what I was fighting for. Too old to forget what I saw." She did not ask more. She understood that kind of silence. They reached the cabin just as the sky turned gold. It was small but clean, tucked against a rocky rise with a lean-to for the horse and a well a few paces off. The door creaked when he opened it, and the scent of cedar wood drifted out. Inside, he lit a lantern and showed her the water basin, a folded blanket, a cot. "You sleep here," he said. "I will take the floor." She looked at him. "I do not need coddling. I know." She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "But I would not mind the company." He did not answer with words, just nodded once slowly and sat down beside her on the cot. That night she did not cry, and he did not ask questions. They just sat, shoulder to shoulder, as the silence deepened around them, no longer alone. Cade rose before dawn, careful not to wake her. A faint draft stirred through the chinks in the log walls, carrying the scent of mesquite ash and cool river air. He stepped outside and crouched near the hearthstone to rekindle what remained of the fire he'd banked the night before. The coals took quickly. He added split juniper and set the pot to boil. Inside, Florence stirred under the blanket, eyes fluttering open as light seeped through the shutter cracks. She sat up slowly, brushing her hair back from her face with both hands. The world felt still, like it hadn't quite decided yet how the day would go. She stepped outside without a word, wrapping the shawl he'd left folded for her around her shoulders. Her boots scuffed softly on the packed earth. "You always up this early?" she asked, her voice roughened by sleep. "Old habit," Cade said. "Chores don't wait." He poured her a tin cup of hot water and handed it over. She wrapped her fingers around it and stood beside him while the fire crackled low. "Do you have animals?" she asked. "2 goats. They wander when the gate's not latched, but they find their way back when they're hungry." She nodded, sipping. "I wouldn't mind helping. I'm not afraid of work." "I didn't figure you were." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun crest over the dry ridge to the east. It painted the iron-colored rocks pink and threw long shadows across the scrub. Florence tilted her head. "You've lived here a while." 4 years, he said. "Built the place myself after the flood took the last homestead." She looked over at him. "You were married," he shook his head. "No. Just land and tools. That was enough to lose." She didn't press, and he didn't offer more. They turned toward the lean-to. The goats had broken the latch again, and one of them stood balanced halfway on top of the water barrel, bleating mournfully. By mid-morning, she had rolled up her sleeves and was elbow-deep in scrubbed laundry, kneeling beside the washbasin near the well. Cade worked nearby, repairing a loose hinge on the barn door with a piece of salvaged wire. Neither of them spoke much. But there was no unease in the quiet now, just the rhythm of work, the kind that steadied the hands and settled the breath. At midday, they sat on the porch with tin plates between them. He had boiled beans and fried up the last of the cornmeal cakes. She ate slowly, careful to leave a fair half. She hadn't asked what stores he had, but she could tell they weren't deep. "You planning to head back east?" he asked, not looking at her. She chewed once, twice. "I don't know. You've got kin there." "My father died last spring. My sister married and moved to Missouri. She's got 4 children under 6. They haven't room for another mouth." He nodded once, still not looking at her. "Then you could stay here if you wanted. You'd be safe." "I didn't come west looking for safety." He turned to her then, eyes steady. "What did you come looking for?" She set her plate down. "A home, not just a roof, a place I could belong. I thought marriage would give me that. I thought he would." Cade leaned back, resting his hands on his knees. "You don't need a man to belong here. You've got hands, a back that doesn't bend easy, and a way of looking at the world that doesn't flinch." She watched him for a long time. "And if I did want a man, that'd be your choice," he said. "Not your cost." The wind picked up, lifting the ends of her hair. She didn't speak, but something in her chest eased. That evening she stood at the edge of the riverbank, her bare feet sunk in the cool silt. The water ran low this time of year, but it sang soft over the stones. Cade joined her, boots crunching the gravel behind her. "The land's harder here than I expected," she said, "but quieter. It doesn't ask much if you treat it honest." She bent to pick up a smooth, flat stone, turning it over in her palm. "I think I could learn to live here." He nodded once. "Then I'll teach you what I know." She looked up at him, and for the first time her face softened, not in weariness but in something like hope. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked. "Not lately." She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. And when he offered his hand, she took it, their fingers threading together without ceremony. Neither spoke as they walked back through the dusk. The desert stretched around them, vast and quiet. But that night, the silence between them felt full. The days folded into each other like creased linen, quiet, steady, marked by the slow rhythm of sweat-earned work and the deepening hush that settled between 2 people learning to breathe in the same space. Florence stood on the ladder Cade had braced against the side of the cabin, patching a sun-cracked seam of roof with tar and burlap. The air smelled of pitch and wind-warmed pine. Below, he held the ladder steady, glancing up only grip. "You ever roof a place before?" he asked. "Not unless you count a henhouse with a hole in it." He gave a low chuckle. "You're doing better than I did my first try. I'm not afraid of heights. I just don't trust this ladder. It's honest, just ugly." She squinted down at him. "Sounds like someone I know." He said nothing, but she caught the faint lift at the corner of his mouth before she turned back to her work. By the time the repairs were done, her arms ached and her palms stung with splinters. She came down slow, careful not to lose footing, and when her boots hit the ground, Cade handed her a damp cloth without a word. They sat under the cottonwood near the well, the shade broken and dappled. She leaned her head back against the trunk, eyes half closed. "I had a book once," she said. "A story about a woman who crossed the country alone. She lost everything, but she found a peach orchard in the end." "I've never seen a peach tree west of the San Pedro," Cade said. "It was just a story." He looked at her a long moment. "You planning to write your own?" "I don't know. I thought I'd have children by now, a house with a porch, a man who held my name like it was sacred." Cade's voice was quiet. "You still could." She turned her head, studying him. "Do you think a person can start over, really?" "After they've been made a fool of," he shifted, one knee drawn up, the heel of his boot dug into the dirt. "I don't know about starting over, but I think a person can keep going, and sometimes that's enough to make something new." Florence let the silence stretch. The wind moved through the branches above, casting shifting patterns across the ground. "Did you love her?" she asked. Cade looked away. "I didn't have the chance." She waited. "It was after the war. I was drifting. Ended up near Durango working a freighter line. There was a girl, Marjorie. She played the fiddle like it was a second tongue. Her father didn't like me, said I had too much dust on my boots and not enough land to my name. I told her I'd come back in a year with both." Florence watched his knuckles tighten around a blade of grass. "By the time I did, she was gone. Married to someone with more land than time for her." He didn't say more. He didn't have to. Florence touched his arm, just her fingers, just long enough. That night, she sat on the porch with her bare feet pulled up beneath her and a needle in hand. She was mending one of his shirts, not because he'd asked, but because the seams were pulling loose and she had nothing better to sew. The thread moved through the cloth in neat, even stitches, and the quiet wrapped around her like a shawl. Inside, Cade lit the lamp and sat at the small pine table, sorting through a pile of old tools he'd brought down from the loft. His hands moved slow, deliberate. He didn't look up until she came in and laid the shirt beside him. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." He looked up at her then, eyes steady. "Florence," she met his gaze. "I've been thinking," he said. "I've got seed I never put in the ground, land that could take it if someone helped me keep it watered." She folded her arms. "You offering me a job, I'm offering you a place." She stepped closer. "And if I say yes, then we plant in the fall. You keep your name, I give you mine if you want it. We build what we can." She held his eyes a long moment. "You'd marry me just like that." "I'd learn you first," he said. "But I'd mean it when I said the words." Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the way everything inside her went still and warm. "I don't care about the name," she said. "What do you care about?" She reached out, touched his jaw with her knuckles. "The man." He stood slowly, and this time when he took her hands, he didn't let go. Outside, the wind shifted. The first stars blinked out above the ridge, and inside the cabin, the space between them closed quietly, surely, like a door being drawn shut against the long, cold dark. Florence rose before the sun, the cabin still cool and dim, the air soft with the scent of dew on mesquite. The cockerel hadn't yet called, but she moved quietly anyhow, pulling on her skirt and boots, careful not to wake Cade. He'd fallen asleep late, his hands stained from clearing the far plot, his breathing deep, and even beside her by the hearth, where they had started sleeping since the cot grew too small for the space between them. She stepped outside and crossed to the basin, pumping water slow so the creaking wouldn't carry. The first light of morning caught the edge of the river bend, glinting off the low wash of water winding its way south. She dipped her hands in, the chill biting her skin, and pressed her damp palms to her cheeks. Behind her, the door rasped open. You always up this early now? Cade's voice carried a hushed roughness still shaped by sleep. I heard coyotes near the goats, she said, straightening. Didn't want to tempt them with a late start. They're smart enough to keep to the hills in daylight. I'm not willing to bet a milk pail on it. She turned toward him. You said there was a ridge path that leads to a spring, he nodded. 3 miles west. You thinking of going? I want to see what blooms after the frost. I haven't walked anywhere without waiting in a long time. I'll ride with you. There's some wild tobacco up that way I've been meaning to dry. They left after the morning meal, the horses saddled with care and extra water tied in sloshing canteens. Florence rode with her knees close and her back straight, her skirts gathered over the saddle horn. The trail wound through narrow cuts of stone and scattered juniper, the silence broken only by the steady clop of hooves and the low rustle of wind through Ocotillo. As they crested a rise, the spring came into view, a small basin cradled by rock, fed by a thin trickle that shimmered in the morning light. Around its edge bloomed clusters of yellow primrose and trumpet-shaped flowers in soft violet. Florence dismounted slowly, staring at the wild color. It looks like someone painted the earth. Things grow fierce out here, Cade said, tying off the reins. They have to. She crouched near the edge and touched a petal, careful not to pick it. In Kansas, everything was wheat and sky. This feels older somehow. He walked a few paces off, knelt by a patch of tobacco leaves and began gathering them with practiced fingers. She watched him a moment, the way he moved measured like he trusted the ground beneath him. Did you think you'd end up here? She asked. With you, with any of it, he stood, dusting his hands. No, I figured I'd drift till I wore myself out. Some men aren't built for settling, and yet you built a place. Maybe I just hadn't found a reason to stay before. She rose and stepped closer. And now he looked at her fully. Now I think about the length of a fence line and what kind of shade tree to plant by the porch. Florence's breath caught low in her chest, not from surprise, but from the quiet certainty in him. She reached out, fingers brushing his as he handed her a stem of dried bloom. Tell me something you've never told anyone, she said. He hesitated, then spoke low. When I was 15, I stole a colt from a man who beat his stock bloody. Rode it 2 counties north and told the marshal it wandered into my camp. I never gave it back. She smiled, soft around the edges. Good, his eyes searched hers. Your turn. She looked out over the spring. When I was 13, I wanted to be a naturalist. I used to press flowers between the pages of the church ledger when no one was looking. Got whipped for it when the pastor found them. What stopped you? I got told to grow up and marry. And now, she met his gaze, now I think I might start pressing again. They were quiet a long moment, the wind shifting through the brush, the horses stamping nearby. Cade stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough she felt the warmth of him. Florence, she turned her face toward his. I don't want you to feel beholden. I didn't bring you here expecting anything. I know that, she said, but I want you to stay, not because you've nowhere else to go. Because it's yours too. She looked at him, long and steady. Then ask me. He did. And she said yes, not in a rush of breath or a flush of cheeks, but in the way her eyes didn't leave his and her voice didn't tremble. They rode back slow, the sun high and hot behind them. When they reached the cabin, the goats were waiting by the fence, bleating low and impatient. Florence laughed, the sound light and full, and reached for the gate. That evening she stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame, watching Cade rake the coals for supper. The last of the light cast his face in soft bronze, and the quiet between them held no weight. He looked up. What? She stepped inside. I was just thinking I'd like to plant morning glories along the sill. He nodded. We'll get seed next time we head into town. She moved to the table and sat. And maybe a ledger. Paper worth pressing something on. He smiled without words, and the fire crackled low between them. Outside, the stars began to appear one by one, and the desert settled around the cabin like a held breath finally let go. By mid-June, the first row of corn pushed through the soil behind the cabin, pale green and trembling in the heat. Florence knelt beside the furrows each morning, thinning the weaker shoots, back of her neck damp with sweat. She'd taken to tying her hair in a knot at the base of her skull, clean, practical, out of the way. Cade had built her a trellis near the southern wall, just high enough to catch the afternoon light. She'd strung twine across it with a needle and loop of old wire, each knot tight and even. Wild vines had begun to creep upward, clinging with delicate tendrils. On a Friday morning, a wagon appeared on the horizon, too far to make out the driver, but the shape was unmistakable. 2 mules, slow-paced, hauling something that jostled with every rut in the trail. Cade set his spade aside and narrowed his eyes. Florence stepped up beside him, shading her brow. "Expecting someone? No, but I know that wagon." He took his rifle from the hook by the door, not raised, only ready, and walked out to meet it. Florence followed at a distance, eyes steady. The driver turned out to be a sinewy woman with a sun-leathered face and a gap between her front teeth. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows despite the heat, and her hat looked like it had survived a fire. A boy of about 12 sat beside her, chewing a piece of grass with practiced boredom. "Clara Hodge," Cade said, lowering the rifle but not stepping aside. "Didn't think you'd be so territorial, Valen," she drawled. "I'm just passing through, selling thread and vinegar. Got a sack of dried peaches if your woman wants it." Florence stepped forward. "What's the price?" Clara leaned over the side of the wagon and tossed a small cloth bundle. "For you, a trade. I heard you were stuck in Tucson a while back. Word travels." Florence caught the bundle. "What do you want in return?" "Soap." "The kind that doesn't smell like lye and mule," Florence nodded. "I've got a bar set with rosemary, made it myself." Clara grinned. "That'll do." The boy climbed down and wandered toward the fence where the goats watched him warily. Florence handed over the soap and Clara tossed her the peaches. "You staying put now?" Clara asked. Florence glanced toward Cade. "I am." "Good. This land needs more women who don't scare easy." They left by sundown, wagon creaking west, a thin trail of dust rising in their wake. Cade stood long after they disappeared. "She knew you from before?" Florence asked. "We crossed trails once. She can gut a rattler faster than most men can draw." Florence cradled the peach bundle in her hand, fingers brushing the soft cloth. "We'll boil them for supper, make a sauce." Cade nodded. "I'll start the fire." They ate with their knees touching under the table, the taste of peaches sharp and warm on the tongue. That night, as the wind cooled the last of the heat from the walls, Florence sat with a folded piece of paper on her lap. Blank. Untouched. She looked over at Cade, who was oiling the hinges of the window shutter by lamplight. "I want to write a letter to my sister," she said, "then write one. I don't know how to explain all this." "You don't have to explain. Just tell her what's real." She watched him test the hinge with a quiet creak. "I want to tell her I've found someone who sees me clear, not for what I might become, not for what I left behind, just for who I am." He turned toward her. "Then say that. I also want to tell her I'm not coming back. You could say you've arrived somewhere instead." She dipped the pen in ink and began. The next day, Cade hitched the wagon and rode into Tubac to trade for nails, seed, and a bolt of gingham Florence had asked for. She stayed behind, tending the coop and mending the fence line where a jackrabbit had chewed through. When he came back late in the afternoon, the sky was dark with building clouds and his shirt was streaked with sweat and dust. But he handed her the fabric, and she smiled without a word. She ran her fingers over it, already weighing how much she'd need for sleeves. That evening, just before the storm rolled in, he took her hand as they sat on the porch, thunder in the distance and the scent of ozone on the air. "I have something for you," he said. She looked up, curious. He pulled a narrow ring from his pocket, not gold, but silver, etched with desert vines. "I traded off my old saddle horn for it. Figured a man ought to do things proper even if the preacher's a 3-day ride." Florence stared at it, breath caught hard in her throat. "I know you said the name doesn't matter," he said, "but I'd like you to have mine, not because you need it, because I want to give it." She took the ring, held it between her fingers. "Yes," she said quietly. They were married 2 weeks later under the cottonwood, with Clara as witness and her boy picking at a fiddle with more enthusiasm than skill. Florence wore a dress she'd sewn from the gingham, and Cade shaved for the first time in months, nicking his chin in 3 places. They said their vows without flourish, just hands joined and eyes steady. Afterward, they stood in the field where the corn had grown waist-high, the sun dipping low behind them, painting the land in gold. Florence leaned her head against Cade's shoulder. "Do you still think you weren't built for settling?" she asked. He wrapped his arm around her.